If you absolutely positively have to go away somewhere to watch a rather ragged and untidy match, well, there are worse places to go than Amsterdam. A friend of mine from Holland used to always say, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. So mad respect to the Netherlands for their football, their farmers, no food, and also their openness to exploration and experimentation in things that might be considered taboo elsewhere. Let's delve into Ajax 0, Aston Villa 0. I'm sitting there watching this and I'm thinking that everything about this match, with the exception of the actual football, was like a glimpse into what it could be again. Aston Villa playing on the world's biggest stage against the biggest clubs. Manifest destiny almost. And it doesn't really get much bigger than Ajax. World-renowned, footballing factory. Some of the biggest stars going through that club. And if you don't recognize the broad red stripe on an all-white strip, you just don't really understand football, do you? And by the way, there are hundreds of thousands of songs that a club can play every single game at halftime. This club chooses Three Little Birds by Bob. And you know, when Bob sings, every little thing is going to be all right, somehow it just is. I was convinced that song was going to inspire Leon Bailey to come on after halftime and score some kind of a worldie to win it. Maybe the biggest revelation of this week was that Leon Bailey came very, very close to signing with Ajax a couple of times, that he has a couple of close people in that club, and that he actually even understands a little bit of Dutch. Well, Flemish from his time in Belgium. I, too, am a little bit Flemish right now. I think it's the pollen in the air. And among the 55 or so thousand on hand at the Johan Cruyff Arena, the Holy Trinity show's senior and now foreign correspondent Samir Gaibee, who had to sort out airline issues early on game day. But that didn't stop Mr. Division Retro UK himself from rolling his camera, which I deeply appreciate, because as noisy as the several thousand traveling fans were, the vast majority of us were looking on with jealousy, yearning for a nice pannenkoek, and whatever else the Dutch capital had to offer. Welcome officially to the Holy Trinity Show. I like to break down games into three major issues or moments. And the key numbers were rather grim from an Aston Villa standpoint. That expected goals value, which, by the way, just to remind you, it measures how many times you get into what are expected prime goal scoring areas. Well, that was the lowest of the season. The next lowest was the home game to Sheffield United, but even in that game was 3 times as much as this one. And I hope you appreciate the fact that I'm not going to make a low-hanging fruit scoring in a brothel type gag, because I could in this game. And the struggles with keeping possession, I think, led to more long balls than we usually try. We attempted 32. We were accurate on 56% of them. Again, our traveling support, despite being so outnumbered in a 55,000-seat cauldron, you could hear them throughout the entire game, which makes me wonder if the production companies position the effects mics specifically to make sure they do get the traveling support, to get a little bit of the back and forth stuff, because it was constantly audible throughout the entire game, which made me extremely jealous. I hope you made it home okay and in one piece, and I certainly hope that you weren't trapped in some bar when a Dutch karaoke sing-song broke out, because I heard that happens often and it's a little creepy and off-putting. My first impression after the game was job done. I mean, if you're the home team, especially in the first leg, the onus is on you to go out, score a goal or two, set the tone, and try to have something to hang on to for the second leg. And yes, Villa was second best on the day and way below the standards we'd expect with a patchwork lineup. But if you're telling me a spot in the quarterfinals depends on a win at home at Villa Park on Thursday night, I'll take that. Thank you very much. And so will Unai Emery. He pretty much said as much after the game. And then with West Ham, they're going to be chasing their tie at home on Thursday against Freiburg. So when we meet in London the following Sunday, interesting to see who has more fuel left in the tank. The first big issue that I noticed was Ajax's play out of possession. Keeping in mind, the average age of that team on Thursday was 22.18 years. That was with Jordan Henderson in the lineup. Take him out, it drops to 21 years average age, and you would have never known it based on the discipline they showed without the football. And this is a team like Bayern Munich where the fans demand that you win the division year after year, but they're fifth. They had a terrible start. They had to sack their manager at the end of October, and they're miles away from a Champions League semifinalist. Not, what was that, 3 to 4 seasons ago? The model is very different in Holland, and Ajax takes tremendous pride in discovering and then developing talent and selling it on. But I don't think that model accounts for slipping back as much as they have done this year. And I think there was a lot of emphasis put on pressuring the ball in this particular match. There were examples of it all over this game in all three zones, all the phases of the game. Maybe that's youthful enthusiasm and energy from the home side, or perhaps it was tactical. But when you blank the home team in their ground with that kind of support, tick. Issue of note, refereeing. I always find it fascinating how these continental competitions are officiated. And initially, I thought this chap from Albania was doing a great job of letting the right things go in order to keep the game going. And he was also calling the correct fouls, like paging Michael Oliver. This is a foul, something you needed to call more of in the Luton game. I digress. Initially, I thought he did a great job, but two decisions against Ezri Konsa took a little bit of the shine off, and as usual, a poor refereeing performance comes down to consistency. Now, the first yellow card on Ezri Konsa, I'm sorry, but it's self-inflicted because he drops down and he grabs the ball. And I hate this. And this has been happening in football for a long time, and we all know why players do it. They're trying to con or force the referee into awarding a decision in their favor because they think they're not going to call me for a handball and give me a yellow card. It should be a yellow card every single time that when the play is live, a player grabs a ball, that's a booking. And referees need to clamp down on it. But was Konsa fouled first? And then I'm going to show you the later one, which I don't even think was a foul, which means it couldn't have been a yellow card. Big issue number 3, squad selection. And this is always going to be an intriguing issue going into games like this because, first of all, we get to find out the fitness of the squad. We also find out how much trust the manager has in said squad. But also, we get to see where the priorities may lie in terms of the competitions that lay straight ahead. And we all know that game against Tottenham on Sunday is looming large and may go a long way in deciding which European competition we're playing in next year. Because if we get into the big one, that could mean anywhere from 35 to 50 million pounds right away, depending on bonus clauses in sponsorship deals. So 5 changes from the visit to Luton, and the 180-minute men so far this week include Martinez, of course, Longley, Louise, and Watkins. 2 Europa Conference League debuts handed to Rodgers and Iroegbunam, and everything else was quite logical. Great to hear that Jacob Ramsey's injury is not of the big or serious variety, and that Pau Torres was always going to be withdrawn at halftime, even though, Pau was also struggling to create, to link passes together, and to get around the pressure that was being put on him. Ezri Konsa looked downright awkward in his role, but you know what? He wasn't the only one. When your goalkeeper is named man of the match because a couple of saves and a couple of well-timed sweeper-keeper type clearances, you know it probably wasn't a very good day for the other 10 players who had a terrible time trying to keep possession, create openings, and big chances. Well, you saw the stats. So in that case, it would be extremely harsh to pick on the two youngsters who got their first Europa Conference League starts here because, you know, between Louise, Tielemans, Watkins, Diaby had the game's best chance early. He fired it straight at the goalkeeper. But after that, it just felt like we were hopeful from set pieces. Now, was that because of Villa's lack of precision on the day? Was it down to the opponent's youthful energy and pressure? Let's say 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. My assessment of Big Tim includes the late stages of the Luton Town match as well, where he got 11 minutes. And one thing that kind of concerned me in between both is that he does tend to fly in a little bit late sometimes. He did it twice in the Luton game, gave away fouls both times. He did the same in this game. 1 foul, not bad, but why is that? Is that because he misread the spacing or wasn't patient enough or just didn't read the situation right? And the biggest thing for both he and Rodgers is simply one thing: composure. When do I drive the ball? When do I pass the ball? When do I go forward? When do I go backward? All those things still require some incubation, and we just need to be patient with them. Just before being substituted as he went down and clutched his calf looking for some cramp treatment, Big Tim made a horrendous back pass that he left woefully short. Now, did he leave that pass short because his calf locked up at that moment? Or was that one of those situations where a young player who's fighting the ball a little bit and fighting for relevance, trying to get into this team, big occasion, big game, still in the balance, he said, I'm pulling the chute. Pull me out, because I could see how you could be a little bit spooked. He was fortunate that that didn't turn into something much worse. For Rodgers, Iragbunum, or any young player for that matter, I love to know what's going through their minds when Unai Emery comes across and says, you're starting on Thursday. Is the first reaction, what an opportunity, I'm not going to waste it? Or is it, I can't afford to make any mistakes, otherwise I might not come back to this team? Because both tell a lot about a human being and their professional growth. These are two guys on the outskirts trying to cement their place in a squad. But in order to do that, you can't be constantly distracted or have that little voice inside your head telling you, do I belong here? What if I make a mistake? Big issue number 2, Ezri ejected. And this isn't just about the implications for this particular game, but also what'll happen next week in the return leg. Let's hope Diego Carlos is fit and ready to go. And we have seen numerous examples of Ezri Konsa being perfectly capable and comfortable playing as the widest right of our defenders. But on this particular day, it just was not happening for him. It looked as though he was getting extra special attention from the opponents, and he just couldn't keep us in possession. So then the second half comes around, he goes back to center back, looked far more comfortable until this one particular circumstance. I showed you the yellow card earlier, and you know, a lot of referees might have awarded the free kick to Ezri Konsa. Not today. Konsa's second was eerily similar to the foul at Luton Town, which preceded the 2-2 goal, where two players were jostling and Konsa's arm was being held, but there was not a lot in it. And when the referee has established that he's trying to let play continue and give advantage as much as possible, especially for those very marginal 50-50 flip a coin, it could go either way ones, then I was surprised he gave this, especially after seeing the replay. Maybe it was down to the proximity to the penalty area. But when you see it again from Emi Martinez's angle, my first impression was that is really soft. In fact, bordering on embellishment by the attacker. Now, this happened late enough in the game that it wasn't quite as punitive as, say, if it had happened in the 60th minute, and just 3 minutes later, Tristan Guyer was also given his marching orders. But still, When you're already depleted in the central defender core, losing arguably your most reliable right-footed center back is not entirely optimal. But at least we know for sure Ezri Konsa will be starting against both Tottenham and West Ham. Just before we get to number one, 24/7 Services has been followed around by a bunch of cameras these last few days. Thankfully, not the police. Actually, Studio 46 in Birmingham following them around to various job sites. Look at the spanky new gear they're all wearing. Oh, it's all coming together. You'll be able to see some of these videos on the website and certainly on the socials. And just on that note, I'm always very grateful when you follow my most excellent sponsor on the socials, because who doesn't love a good before and after project photo? These are the addresses below. Thank you so much for doing your thing. And the number one big moment that defined Ajax 0, Villa 0, debut denial. It's always fun to listen to the home crowd whistling in unison at Big Emmy as he lives rent-free in their heads, and I understand that the goalkeeper that basically single-handedly eliminated the Netherlands in a World Cup penalty shootout would probably lead to some grudges being held by the big crowd, but it sure feels like the more people jeer him, the better he gets. Emmy had very few stressful moments, although I imagine seeing Brian Brobby bearing down on you at breakneck speed would have been mildly terrifying, because that chap's a unit and he scored almost 20 goals in all competitions. But really, the pulse was rarely racing until the 67th minute when Ajax finally conjured up a moment and an opening, at which time Emmy did what he has been doing all season long. Thankfully, goalkeepers just aren't high load-bearing positions, which is a good thing, because right now the alternatives are Robin Olsen, who struggles mightily with the technical footballing demands of an Unai Emery system, and Joe Gauchi is just totally unproven. And I wouldn't be surprised if Big Emmy just said, "I'm playing," because you know how much he aspires to the biggest stages. And that environment, that atmosphere, that game was the closest thing to Champions League football we've experienced for a very long time. And in minute 67, he stonewalls Kenneth Taylor, which is the least Dutch-sounding name I've ever heard in an Ajax side. It should be Kenneth von Taylor. And then he doesn't just make the save, he corrals it and prevents a corner at the same time. And I wonder, does the player give a tell? Does Emi Martinez anticipate where the shot is going based on some cues from the striker? Because, I mean, this isn't much farther out than penalty territory. And as much as I'm very confident about Aston Villa's ability to overturn a 1-0 deficit at home, that still would have been a big moment that would have given Ajax something to hold on to next week. Next up, wow, boy, what a huge game with Tottenham that could go a long way in determining whether we're playing Champions League football next season. And we've got this great run going against London sides, 12 wins in a row, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't do the double over Spurs again this season. But Sonny and Kulusevski terrify me for some reason. And they are probably looking at this as an absolute can't-lose game, because 8 points at this stage in the season, that is a big hill to climb and overcome. And although there's no Richarlison and probably no Porro for Big Ange, you could rest assured that Christian Romero will be whacking and hacking and chopping people down left, right, and center. Might be a good idea for Ollie Watkins to wear 2 pairs of shin guards. The question for me is always, does Tottenham benefit from not having to play a game in midweek, or does Aston Villa benefit for being in a bit of a rhythm? And I think players always would prefer to play games rather than train. And, you know, despite Emi Martinez, Longley, Watkins, and Luiz, the rest of the squad has been rotated nicely. We're leaning on Ollie Watkins a lot, obviously, but I still feel like he will be chomping at the bit on Sunday in a big game that'll have a lot of neutral eyeballs on it. And maybe one of the reasons is this drama surrounding Matty Cash. The Spurs fans have put a bounty on his head for the incident with Bentancur in our last meeting. Bentancur's fit and available on Sunday. But it'll be a question to see if Matty Cash even starts, given the health of our other center backs. Our clocks are springing ahead this weekend. Daylight savings time returns. It's that time of year again. Oh my goodness. And I have some very exciting news to share during the Tottenham review. Let's hope that's a joyous show. Until then, be well, and as always, up the mighty Villa!